Welcome to episode 29 on the journey to conscious healthcare. This is series 4, episode 3, and is called Exploring the Future of NDIS, Health and Education. In this podcast, we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness, and fulfillment in your life and that of others. The journey to conscious healthcare looks at the healthcare industry, disability sector, and how to best navigate these areas to get the best for you and your life. I'm your host, Trevor, and I'm the founder and CEO of Conscious Healthcare SA, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. Today's show is sponsored by Conscious Healthcare SA. Conscious Healthcare SA is now employing, that is right, we're creating ripples and making available more dream roles for practitioners to fulfill on what it is that they do best. Even better yet, we've got an international reach with some of our occupational therapists being based around the world in places such as France and the UK. How good is that for flexibility? If you're interested in exploring an allied health career where you genuinely get to explore patient-centered practice, please get in touch. For further details, please visit the show notes. Rightio, joining us today, we do have with us the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commissioner, Tracy Mackey. So rather than going through the long introduction and all that sort of fun stuff, which I'm sure we're hanging out for, I might just get you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and also what your role is and how you come to be.
Thanks, Trevor, and thanks for having me on this afternoon. I guess I feel like taking up this commissioner role is something that has been a very long journey. So my brother, who is not quite 2 years younger than me, was born with a disability, and obviously I've been his big sister his whole life and been on the journey of what it means to have a disability and navigate school, navigate growing up, navigate entering the workforce, building independence, and all of those things along the way. As I've been, in my sister role, I've also had a career that's been in and out of what I would call human services. So I've worked in the disability space, I've worked in aged care, I've worked in child protection for most of my career. And it's a lovely opportunity to come back into the disability space and in such an important role that really makes a difference and ensures people are receiving quality services and supports, and that there's a bit of a safety net there through the work of the Commission.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting, I love that. I've got a bit of a personal story as well, as we just said off air before about various other family members. And I think it's really great if you can do something where you've got passion, you're dedicated, and you know what you do on a daily basis makes a real big difference. It's not box ticking as such. It's really about actually how you can positively impact people's lives. I'd love to just explore a little bit more with your role at the Commission. What is it that you do for the lame person? Not everyone's going to be as educated in regards to what you do and look into the ins and outs. So I'd love to explore that for the audience, please.
Well, I wish there was a three-point answer I could give you to what do I do. Maybe I'll explain from the point of view of what I'm trying to influence and change.
Absolutely.
So today I'm here in Adelaide, hence with you, and I've been talking to my team here that are based in South Australia, talking about the things that really matter to us as a commission and that we're really striving for. So one of those is to make sure that we put the rights of people with disabilities right at the centre of all of the decisions we make. So not just the big decisions about actions that we take, compliance actions against providers, but also all those micro decisions which really do influence the outcomes for individual participants. We've been talking about how the Commission can seem like a big, scary bit of government, but in fact what we really want it to be is a place where participants can trust and feel confident and safe around raising issues so that they can have the best possible supports. And so I've been encouraging the team today to think about what it feels like to be a participant, to run through a complaints process or to be part of an incident that's reported. So one of the major things that I've been pushing is that participant focus or participant lens in everything we do. The other thing that I've really been focusing on, I haven't quite been in the role a year, and the Commission itself is pretty new. We've only been around for 4 years and nationally for less than 2. So the other thing that we're really focusing on is how do we mature as a regulator? because the whole disability sector is very new to regulation. So it's important that we understand what role we need to play and how we can influence the sector to really respond to the expectations and the needs of people with disabilities, and also improve the quality of services and supports over time. And we need to do that with providers and also through individual workers. So that's something that's very much taking up our time.
Oh, fantastic. And I've listened to a couple of other podcasts. You've been very busy this year for sure. I know it might be 10 months or a year that you said earlier, but I think the impact that you're making and clearly feet on the ground making things happen, which is great to see. Also noticed Minister Bill Shorten's also got a very much a similar approach about making sure that we're really doing co-design and also understanding what the real problems are and also what the success stories are, because I think it's important for us to not just focus on the negative. There's many good things that are happening as well, and let's spread more of that cheer. Yeah. One of the questions I do have to jump into, so our next one, which does cover off on one of the things I believe that you have been looking into. I know when you spoke to Dr. George, I think you covered this. But particularly it's about registered and unregistered providers. So how does your involvement with those that are registered versus unregistered differ? And the second part to that is, do you have a viewpoint on whether providers should be registered or not? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
So I've spent a lot of my time this year making sure that the Commission is what I would call outward facing. So what do I mean by that? I mean that we're out there talking to people, listening to people, understanding the experiences that people are having, and also hearing from the sector about what isn't working from their point of view from a regulatory sense. One of the most constant issues that gets raised with me and has done since the first day I started is this issue around registration. Now, at the moment, registration is what I would call a really blunt tool. You're either registered or you're not. But for us, in some respects, that doesn't matter because everyone is covered by the NDIS Code of Conduct. And it doesn't matter if you're registered or not, you've got to adhere to that Code of Conduct. And ignorance around the code is no defence for not living up to what the code's all about. So we have powers as a regulator to take action against both registered and unregistered providers. So my first point is that in terms of being the regulator of the sector, we cover the whole sector, both registered and unregistered. And it doesn't matter if you're a big provider, a small provider or a sole operator, it's all of it. The second thing I'd say is because registration got raised so much with me early on and continues to, what we're conscious of is that the way registration's been set up was before the Commission existed and before we had any experience and knowledge about how the market was going to evolve, how what would be the expectations of participants as consumers in the market. So now we've got that 4 years of experience under our belt. We've got a lot of evidence around different data, around case studies, around various consultations and engagements that we've had with people, and I've led quite a few of them this year, to really pick away at all of the issues around registration. And I don't think it's as simple as saying we register everyone or we don't register everyone. I think it's a much more nuanced approach is required. There are certainly some areas that you'd like to probably progress on more quickly, and that would be things like we've got supported independent living registered operators, but we equally have unregistered providers in that same space. And that's an area where there is a level of risk attached in terms of service delivery, and the oversight there would be incredibly helpful to provide the kind of protections that we might like. So it's up to governments to work together, state and territory ministers, together with Minister Shorten as the federal minister, to work together to think about should there be some changes about who is required to be registered and who's not. In addition to that, we need to think about how we have visibility of the workforce, because it's the workforce that is the interface between participants. And we want the workforce to understand their responsibilities around the code. So we have worker screening in place. That's going quite well. We know that quite thousands of unregistered providers have sought to access details around individual workers screening, and we know that self-managed participants have done the same. So that's a helpful step in starting to have visibility that the workforce understands what's required of them. But again, something for governments to consider. what would the arrangements look like going forward. We've got the NDIS review that Bruce Bonner-Hady and Lisa Paul are co-chairing. That review is a really important mechanism to start to explore these issues further. And as a commission, we've certainly fed through to that review all of the work we've done in the last 10 months or so around registration. And we've also published quite a bit of that online on our website to be open around the issues we're seeing and some of the thoughts we have around future arrangements.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting topic. I mean, we're a registered provider at Conscious Healthcare SA. There's many that are registered or not. I think ultimately, certainly my focus on this anyway is very much about quality, and I'm sure that's an angle where you're coming from. Well, I do have a question coming up about Minister Shorten. I think the big one in regards to just following on from registered versus unregistered is just making sure that people who are providing NDIS supports are aware, because that's been one of the major concerns that's continued to keep coming through on the podcast and other different mediums, just in regards to if someone's maybe typically not done NDIS services, they then get involved. They actually do have to abide by the rules and regulations. Have they put the investment into understanding it? So is an NDIS physio versus a general private practice physio the same physio? And I think the quick answer for that is no, they're not, because if you have a report by someone who understands how to write the language versus someone who doesn't, it's not the same report. So it's a really tricky one. I don't know if you have any comment onto that. I know it leads into our next one that we've got coming up.
What I would say is we've put in place practice standards for many elements of supports and services, not all. And those practice standards are required to be adhered to, and we've got to demonstrate your ability to adhere to them if you're a registered provider. But they are equally the guide for unregistered providers. So we're looking at whether or not you're operating at a quality standard. The other thing that we've put in place, and we launched it a few months ago, is the Capability Framework. And to any of your listeners out there, if you haven't already had a look, go to our website, have a look at the Capability Framework, sit down with a cup of tea. It's really helpful. So lots of very practical tools for providers, for supervisors, for workers, for participants about how to select someone who's going to provide supports to you if you're a participant, about how to appoint a disability support worker, what are the attributes. So there's all sorts of very practical things in there. It's been designed not only with input from the Commission, but we've had an enormous amount of input from participants and workers and supervisors. So that real practice level of knowledge. So have a look at the Capability Framework, because that's also what we're expecting of you, whether you're registered or unregistered.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's great. I jumped on there the other day and had a refresher and having a look, and I thought it looked really great. And I think having people get further educated about that's a fantastic step in the right direction, because ultimately then that's going to get greater outcomes. Moving on to our next one about Minister Bill Shorten. So I interviewed him a couple of months ago, had a big event at Adelaide Oval there, which was great fun. And he specifically had a focus on outcomes and quality. I'm curious as to your thoughts about how this is achieved, specifically given the current environment. A new graduate, for example, allied health. So if we talk about allied health, new graduate, they can walk out and charge NDIS rates that are the same tomorrow as someone who's got 10 years experience, say in the disability sector or in practice nonetheless. I and many others would argue that the service provided isn't comparing apples with apples in that sense. Obviously, one's got more skills and experience and probably going to be more effective, so better bang for buck, many might argue. What's your perspective on this?
So a couple of things. First of all, I'd say we really want to build the confidence and level of comfort in participants and their families to make choices about who provides their services. It's part of the reason why in the Capability Framework we've got particular tools for participants about, what are the kind of things you should think about when you're choosing certain practitioners. So I'd say that's kind of the first avenue that we'd really encourage people through. The other thing I was going to talk about, the second thing I was going to say is that the Commission doesn't have responsibility for the price guide. But having said that, if you're not getting a level of quality of service, you can let us know. And if you let us know, we can chase up with the provider. So if you're not getting, what you expect, if you're not being heard in terms of asking for the kinds of outcomes that you might want, then you can let us know and we can follow that up. And lastly, I was going to mention that we are very interested in what the outcomes are. So last week we held our inaugural research roundtable where we had around 20 academics from around the country. And one of the key areas that we delved into there was hearing about research and how it applies in the Commission's areas of responsibility around what quality of life looks like for people with disabilities. And so we want to get into that domain about outcomes. Are things improving? Is it having a positive impact? Is it how people want to spend their time? All of those different attributes around quality of life. So we'll certainly be contributing to the NDIS review around the kind of outcome indicators that we're thinking would be helpful. And we'll also be drawing on the work that's happening with researchers in Australia and also overseas around outcomes.
Absolutely. It's a very interesting question and discussion, particularly because it's you might not necessarily want to get an outcome tomorrow. If everyone's going to work at different paces, I'm very, motivated and driven. I want to get results, like yesterday, and some might want to do that slower. I think the biggest thing just on that topic is really about ensuring quality is delivered. I know I had someone that I know very close and personal that didn't have a great experience, sadly, because their providers weren't doing the right thing, and what that looked like was making sure whilst you certainly want to increase the ability for people to have choice and control, sometimes if insight might not be there, they might not necessarily ensure that the provider's doing the right thing. And ultimately, I think that's where we're really wanting to come in to make sure that quality's in place, that we can trust those that are positions of power to help people move forward. And it sounds like you're very much eager to keep moving in that space.
Absolutely. And some of the participants I talked to who are perhaps in their late 40s or into their 50s talk about how disability services used to be, and they certainly talk about the difference. But what they also, what that's done, their experience over many decades, people used to, it used to be a really good thing to be able to get in and get some service. But now it's your entitlement to get that service. So now you can actually say, no, actually, I don't want that. That's not what I'm, rather than just accepting that that's what I'm being given. And so, some people really want some support to be able to make that decision and say to people, that's not my preference.
Oh, I think that's really important. I think many people that I've been speaking to, I'm sure the same with you, is crying out as far as with the quality continuing to improve. I think you'll end up finding participants, those in the sector get more educated about what's happening, and through everyone being more educated, only quality is going to improve, right? And if quality improves, isn't the outcome only going to be better for a participant? So
Absolutely.
I'm certainly excited about that.
Yeah, and that goes to also what's offered for people. So if we look around, one of the things I still find surprising is how similar the service offerings are to what they were pre-NDIS. So we've seen some areas of innovation, but really we need much more. So what are people expecting? What are they asking for? And, if you've got some providers out there that are listening and they want to innovate, I think there's a bunch of participants that are crying out for really targeted responses to their needs.
100% agree with that. I'll give a shout out actually to Ben Wachter. I hope I'm saying the name right. He runs KidX, Disability X. I don't know if you've heard of it in Adelaide. But one thing he's done really fantastically is he's making it accessible, something like all four on the floor, like making it easier for people that typically public and events don't have change tables and things that are available for people with disability. And he's really innovated in that space. And I know there's a few grants that are out there, and it's really exciting to see these new innovative ideas coming together and what sort of an impact it's making for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a second question from my last one there is, how does a participant know they're receiving quality service? I think you've alluded to this slightly earlier, so it might be banging on about that again. I'm seeing many practices expand into disability services without necessarily increasing that team's capability, whether that be through skills for the practitioner, so understanding disabilities better and also what to do, but also that understanding of how the NDIS operates. Do you have any particular thoughts on this?
If you're serious about being a quality operator in the disability space, then you need to be constantly talking to those that are your customers, so participants, about whether or not it's working for them. And not just a simple yes or no at the end of a particular session, or not just once a year in a survey, but actually talking to them about, what part of this did you enjoy? What part of this didn't you enjoy? Are there things you don't like doing? Is this too regular? Like, delve into whether or not it suits the person, and don't assume if it suits someone that it's going to suit everyone. So the NDIS is all about individual choice and control. So recognise that as a service provider, and you'll be certainly on the path around improving quality. The other thing I'd say is don't buy your policies and procedures from a consultant, because that, if you're going to get a consultant to help you, that's fine. But do it together and figure out how you're going to put in place those policies and procedures. Just buying a set off the shelf is not going to give you a quality service. It's not going to allow you to manage the development of your staff. So think very carefully about the way in which you're going to evolve as a provider over time. And the other thing I'd say is that there are really good examples of good practice. Next year, the Commission will be starting to profile some of those areas of good practice. And we're also going to profile some of the areas where there's not good practice, because we want the whole sector to be aware and try and learn from those experiences. So if you're not already part of a network, think about joining one so that you can share what does and doesn't work and learn from others. So have that learning mindset.
Oh, 100% agree with that. And I think it's really important. I've seen various different ebooks and things around. I think it's, as you're sort of saying about, what the frameworks and what do you expect for any provider, I think it's really important to have participants understand, is this a good support worker or whatever the function might be? Am I getting quality? And actually understanding what those indicators are, because that benchmarking then will quickly work out those that are hitting it and those that aren't, and ultimately it's going to end up driving services to increase quality, I dare say. Whilst we're talking about increasing quality, that usually comes, or may come sometimes, from complaints. What complaints are you tending to receive at the Commission? What's sort of happening about these?
So we're still seeing an increase in the number of complaints each month, each quarter, and I think that will continue for some time. And that's not a bad thing. What it means is people are starting to come to us with more of those complaints. So we've had that growth. And what we do know is the majority of complaints are about what we would call provider practice. So how's something actually being delivered? The next biggest category is about worker conduct or capability. So they're the two big ones, and they're the ones that we look at all the time. The next category is around abuse and neglect, and thankfully that's at a lower proportion, but it's still quite dominant and something that we want to respond to and continue to work out to try and reduce the incidence of abuse and neglect. But the provider practice and the worker conduct capability elements are really about that continual improvement and investment in whether or not you're delivering a quality service and whether or not you're targeting it to the needs of that individual that you're supporting.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned about complaints going up. Not necessarily celebrating complaints going up, but I do know that you had a recent campaign called Make It Known, Make It Better. I know we've been certainly seeing on about it at Conscious Healthcare SA. I think it's been really fantastic to see. I'm curious as to what you've been seeing come out of it. Is that the result of people complaining more? I don't particularly want to just emphasise on complaining. It's more about, are people maybe getting more aware of what they're actually getting in a service, because it is about, hey, I have a voice, I'm entitled to have a good service and it can be quality. So I don't want to just focus on the negative angle, particularly about what are you discovering out of this campaign?
Well, the beautiful thing about Make It Known, Make It Better is that was designed by participants. And if you're a provider or a sole worker out there, we really encourage you to visit the website. There's lots of tools available. There's posters, and for participants, there's a bunch of very small video vignettes, which are all by participants, sometimes by their family members, talking about different aspects of what you should expect, what you can do if something happens, how you can resolve things for yourself if you want to, or how you can escalate it to us. So that's been the real joy of that one, getting participants involved, and they've been our best champions in getting the information out there for other participants. It's certainly helpful in driving people to understand that the Commission exists, but what we really need is people to not feel like complaint is such a big step. So we're in fact playing with the language of complaint at the moment, and we're trying to give people other options, because I think certainly the feedback I've heard directly from participants is complaint feels like a really big step to take, and perhaps they're just not happy with something, not comfortable with something, and don't really want to keep with their service provider, and think if they complain that might have a negative ripple effect, first of all, we'd say to them that shouldn't happen and there are protections around that happening. But second of all, we'd say to them, just give us some feedback early. The earlier you can make it known, the earlier we can make it better. So that's the whole intent behind that campaign.
I think that's really important. And you mentioned there about people being worried about if their services cease. I think ultimately, hey, let's reflect back to continuity of service is something that's really important. So if that was to occur, that wasn't a good quality provider, as I think you just said there before anyway. They weren't a good quality provider if you would raise something up, which is only going to improve the service for the participant and you would have thought for the company. So they should positively reflect on that, I would hope. I'm sure not everyone's like that, but I think, that's the essence of what we're trying to achieve, I think.
That's right. That's the intent from our point of view as well. We also have arrangements and we look very carefully to make sure that people aren't left short in terms of the supports and services they need. So if something particularly challenging has occurred and it's not feasible or safe for that person to stay receiving supports from that provider, then we'll work through that process with the participant, often with the support coordinator, usually with the NDIA, to look at what else can be put in place. And we can do that relatively quickly if needed.
Oh, fantastic. Wait lists, interesting topic. You bring this one up. We talk to lots of support coordinators and all they do is pick up the phone, call, wait list, or they might accept a referral but then go onto a wait list and don't get services. So I'm quite interested what your viewpoint is on wait lists for NDIS participants, specifically providers who might hold wait lists whilst they're recruiting to fill a position. So, for example, accept a referral but not maybe let that person be aware of, hey, we can't actually provide service for you for 6, 8, 12 weeks. I mean, I've known some 6 months, for example, but not let the participant know. So what's your thoughts in regards to wait lists? I know I've got my own strong views, but I'd love to know what yours are.
I guess I would say a couple of things here. First of all, if you've got a support coordinator that is good, they'll be making sure that you access the services that you need as quickly as possible. And so their responsibility is to help you do that. If they're not doing that, if they're just putting you on wait lists, then maybe it's time to look at whether or not that support coordinator is meeting your needs. Because just like everyone else who is providing supports and services to you as part of your package, you have choices about your support coordinator. So that's the first thing I'd say to people. The second is that all, as I've said, registered, unregistered, sole operators, large organisations, doesn't matter who you are, you need to be cognizant of the code of conduct and operate within that. And if that means if you're stringing someone along and that is detrimental to them, you might want to think carefully about the way in which you're doing that and look at whether or not you're breaching the code. Now, there'd be all sorts of considerations in that, but we do expect a high level of compliance with that code of conduct, and so we'd encourage people to think about the individual practices they have. At the Commission, we are not managing wait lists, and I would say it's also not something that is a regular, we certainly get complaints about it, but it's not as regularised as some of the other areas of complaint that we get. And we also know that it can be quite geographic in nature. So there's particular areas where we will see stress points, and we won't necessarily look at it from a waitlist point of view, but we'll certainly work with our colleagues across government, particularly in the NDIA, around how we can make sure the provision of supports and services is available in certain locations. So, for example, we've been doing some work at the Commission over recent months with the Northern Territory Government, thinking about what service delivery looks like in remote areas, and particularly as the regulator, how we can facilitate the delivery of those services in remote areas.
100% agree. I think innovation and lots of things need to happen to be able to make services available, because the rural areas certainly are hindered. Wait lists are very long, and equally as well, I think one of the big things is with wait lists, for example, I had an example from a support coordinator that they had a participant, I think it was about 2-3 months, hadn't got a service. We were waiting on a wait list for someone. And this support coordinator hung up, and after they hung up, they called back and pretended to be someone else and saying, hey, can I get this service? And that provider that equally didn't provide a service then ended up saying, no worries, send a referral through straight away. And I'm kind of wondering in regards to, say if someone is doing that type of thing, is where do you complain? Because it's not particularly maybe about a participant than it's more about the provider? Does it just go direct to yourself? Because I know typically a complaint might occur about a participant. So, not about a participant. A participant might complain, hey, this is getting done to me. But then I suppose in that situation, is it directly, I don't know how it fits into the whole boxes or...
Look, as I said, there's a whole lot of circumstances that surround any of those situations, but you can let us know, and if there is something that we can do, we will certainly take a look at it.
Yeah, perfect. Rightio. So your role is definitely about increasing quality and safeguards for people with disability. What's your thoughts on conflict of interest? It is a very big topic here. We might have to just slow down, take a breath. Specifically about support coordinators referring internally for other services. Mind you, I better add that it happens in lots of different services. It's not just in that situation. So be very clear for that, especially given their position of power. So how do you view this, especially given the consideration of quality and safeguards for people with disability? So the conflict of interest and how they're making sure that they're giving open choice and control without coercing.
Mm-hmm. So we've just been talking about the role of support coordinators, I think it's really important that participants and their families who are involved in decision making with the participant ensure that the support coordinator is delivering a quality level of support. That's their role as well. So if you're not happy with them, you should be raising that with them. If you don't feel comfortable raising that with them, you can raise it with us. I've certainly had a lot of people talk to me about the level of quality and the difference in quality of support coordinators in all sorts of scenarios. And similarly, the supports that are provided and the quality of supports provided by plan managers. So in both areas, so we call them the intermediaries, both of those are something that are very much in my sights, and come early next year, we'll be doing a bit of a deeper dive into those spaces because they are common themes in many of the complaints and incidents that we see. So not only do we see the complaints when people are not happy with something, we also see the incidents that occur when the supports are not provided in the right way. So a support coordinator referring on to a particular service without that service being appropriate for the individual, or arrangements being in place between a service provider and a support coordinator. Often the conflict isn't in larger organisations that have both of those functions. Often the conflict exists where there's an arrangement that is not overt between a particular organisation and a particular support coordinator, or an organisation that does support coordination.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I won't go into that because, geez, that's a can of worms there. There's a few of those things happening, although it sounds like watch out. And ultimately, hey, this is all coming back down to quality. If you're doing quality and if you're doing the right things, I mean, a test for me is, hey, one, does it pass the pub test? If you go down the pub, does anyone that's fair and reasonable agree with it? And two, can you put your head on the pillow at night? And you should be able to do if you're doing quality services. That should be an easy one that you sleep like a baby, because maybe sometimes it's challenging and maybe sometimes it's all a bed of roses. But ultimately, if you put your head on the pillow at night, it's usually because you're probably doing the right things. Yeah. So quite interesting. It was a big flag. I certainly read between Minister Shorten talking about registration, which I know we spoke about earlier. I think with support coordination, it's an interesting one. It's such a broad role, and I'd be interested to see where that goes, because it does sound like and more needs to be done. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about where that'll sort of go.
Absolutely, and the NDIS review will no doubt look at support coordination as an area of support as part of the broader NDIS arrangements. And in the meantime, we'll be looking at how we can be very clear about the requirements around support coordination, because there's some fairly unscrupulous operators in that space at the moment. And I was in Melbourne yesterday hearing about a particular organisation that is not operating in the way in which anyone would expect, and they're supporting a large number of people with support coordination. Yeah,
that's tricky. We won't go too much further into that. I just think it is important to note that, hey, getting that a bit clearer, and also understanding that, I think we've spoken about this before, NDIS isn't the only lifeboat in the ocean. I think it's really important to understand, hey, because I often see support coordination ends up becoming crisis support, which it's not what its role is, right? But like getting that clearer is what it sounds like is coming forward is certainly going to make it a lot easier. Once again, focusing on the quality standards. We've got a few levers. I'm just going to jump into this question. So your core function, promoting and the delivery of progressively higher standards of supports and services to people with disability. How are you going about to achieve this? So what strategy or levers? I might have heard about them before. I'd love to hear what you're sort of pulling and what are you doing to increase that?
We've been working on what we've called a regulatory strategy for the last few months, and we're about to launch that regulatory strategy. And it spells out all of the levers that we have as a regulator to do two things. First of all, make sure that there are safeguards in place. Second of all, make sure that the quality exists across the levels of supports and services that are available. We use those levers in really different ways. So in trying to influence quality, we might use what a lot of people might think about as our pointy end of compliance. So we might use our ability to do civil proceedings, put in place penalty notices, do compliance notices, do banning orders, all of those, are quite significant compliance actions that we can take. The reason why they impact quality is because they're a deterrent to others to operate in the same way. So they're kind of our deterrent end. At the other end, we've got levers such as educating, informing, promoting, encouraging, enabling. All of those allow us to be quite proactive in influencing what good looks like. We want to be really overt about what good looks like. Hence why I mentioned before that next year we'll be stepping into the space of starting to call out where we see good practice. We think that's an important part of our role at the Commission.
I think that's fantastic to be able to say, hey, this service is going well. I don't know how you're going to be able to go with that. Does that mean you're going to be able to name names there? Or it's like, because it's going to be tricky, isn't it? This whole where's the line? I don't know if that's going to be possible or not, but it will be certainly good to be able to go, hey, here's where it's going well.
We're certainly not looking to call out this organisation is great.
Yeah.
That's not the space that we'll be in. But we certainly do want to call out, for example, case studies around this is what good support coordination looks like.
Oh, fantastic.
Here's what it looks like. This is what, appointing a disability support worker that really gels and meets the need of an individual participant looks like.
Yeah.
So really picking on the areas of practice and starting to call those out and give real examples around good case studies.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm a very visual person, so I know I'll very much appreciate that. I've loved the videos that have been out and being able to actually see, hey, here's what that looks like. And then you can sort of compare as to are you meeting those marks or not. So I think that's really good. Now we've got our big question, which we've got here to finish on. So let's pretend it's 20 years into the future and we've achieved success in the disability sector. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Paint me a picture.
I'm really conscious that what it would look like for me as a big sister, as someone who might work in the sector, could be very different to what it might look like for someone else with a disability. Because if we think about the NDIS, we've got 530,000 individuals who have their own experience of what supports and services they expect, they need, they want. So when I think about what things might look like in the future, I just hope they're different. Because as I said before, what we see now is many of the very same or very similar service offerings to what existed pre-NDIS. The funding is now through different elements, but that they're often very similar in the way in which they're delivered. So I'd love it if there were really unique offerings that really did respond to the fact that people with disabilities are all individuals that deserve and should have access to the kind of supports and services they need.
Oh, I love that. I was at a disability inclusion workshop this week with Purple Orange. I'm not sure if you've heard of those in South Australia, and it was really fascinating to hear what different pictures look like. And I feel like you're very much along that pathway of accessibility, understanding that it is different, and every individual is an individual's experience, hence it's going to be different for everyone. So that's fantastic. That does bring today's episode to an end. I hope you have found it educational and learnt something from it. As fellow Aussies, you know there's nothing worse than being stingy. So if you've got value from this, please do make sure you share this with anyone who you think might benefit, whether that be a participant, support coordinator, or whoever it happens to help. Tracy, before we close off for today, do you have any final words for our listeners at all?
Well, I guess I just need to put in a pitch that if you're a participant or you're working in the sector and you see something happening that's not right or you're not comfortable with what's happening to you, please let us know. You can visit our website at www.ndiscommission.gov.au, or you can give us a call on 1800 035 544, and you can just let us know what's going on. And remember, if you do want to make a complaint, it doesn't have to be something that is overwhelming. You can do it even without telling us who you are. Just let us know what's happening so we can try and look into it and help. And you can do that on our website.
Fantastic. I'm really excited to see how things will continue to move forward. I'm very excited about what the future holds, and we'll have to watch this space. As always, if you have any feedback for me, please get in touch via email. Likewise, if you're after allied health services, please do get in touch with us at Conscious Healthcare SA. The details you'll need will all be in the show notes. I'll make sure I put in links to various different videos and how to complain, also how to fundamentally find out if you're getting good quality services as well. So we'll put those all in the show notes. We'll see you on the next episode. Thanks so much.